Hello and welcome to another chess guess video. And today, can you play chess like Capablanca? Now, most of us can't, but in this chess guess series, I have the moves covered and we'll go over a game between Jose Raul Capablanca, who was the third official world chess champion, and he won in 1921. He won the World Chess Championship title from Lasker, who actually held the title for 27 years, longer than anybody else. Lasker defeated Steinitz in 1894, and then he lost his title in 1921 to Capablanca. And this is a game from that 1921 World Chess Championship match between these two titans. So, let's begin here. I normally don't expand my image so large here on the screen, but I wanted to cover up, all the chess moves. I had some encouragement from some viewers who actually liked this guessing format. So let's begin. Capablanca with the white pieces. He begins with d4. Now, this is just a common opening move, but if you have a choice between e4 or d4, d4 is a little bit more strategic. And now here you can guess Capablanca's moves, but feel free to try and guess what moves Emanuel Lasker will play as well. So Lasker responds with d5, keeping things even in the center. And now what do you think Capablanca will play here? There are many options. But he continues with knight to f3, kind of a flexible move. It controls these squares in the center, develops a knight, and usually you want to develop your knights before bishops because they're a little bit slower. So what does Lasker do in response here? Well, he just mimics Capablanca's moves, bringing his knight out as well. And now with Capablanca to move, what do you think he will play here? Well, the game continues with c4, and we've transposed a little bit here. It's still a queen's pawn opening, but if e6 is played, we might go into a queen's gambit declined. So Capablanca with the move here, what should he play next? Or excuse me, Lasker moves first here. He does transpose into the Queen's Gambit declined, and now with Capablanca to move, what will Capablanca play? So we have bishop to g5. So right away, a pin of the knight to this queen, and we're in the Queen's Gambit declined. And apparently this is the traditional variation here. And Capablanca responds with, let me get this right. Lasker, in response to Capablanca's pin on the knight, just protects that knight so that if the knight is captured, he can recapture with his knight. Now, you might be thinking, especially the beginners out there, well, is there a way to start putting pressure on this pawn right here in the center? And that's generally what you want to do. But we need to get this other knight out. And let's see what happens next. So before developing that knight, which could be pinned here, if that knight develops up to c3, Capablanca decides to develop his pawn to e3. And you see how he brings the bishop outside of this pawn chain. So that's usually a good strategy. You want to get the bishop, if it's a bad bishop, you want to get it outside of the pawn so it's not blocked in behind them. And now also e3 fortifies that d4 pawn. So here we have bishop to e7, breaking the pin finally here. And then the game continues with knight up to c3. Because now that the bishop is already committed to moving to e7, it's not likely that that bishop would move again and then try and pin the knight. So here we have castling by Lasker. And what do you think Capablanca should do in this position? Well, he needs to get his king castled, so he'll probably have to move this bishop. But usually if this bishop is moved too early, then this pawn can be captured, and then that forces that bishop to move again. So let's see what Capablanca does. Instead, he brings his rook over to the c file, which can be a good plan in the Queen's Gambit declined, because there's most likely going to be an exchange of these pawns on c4 and d5, and a lot of times the c file will open up and the rook will be well placed there. So Lasker responds with b6. So we see Lasker's bishop is a bad bishop blocked in by his pawns, whereas Capablanca's bad bishop is outside of the pawn chain. So another way to activate this bishop is to fianchetto here and either place the bishop on b7 or maybe even a7 here, lining up on that pawn and maybe trading off Capablanca's good bishop for Lasker's bad bishop. So let's see what happens. Capablanca, he goes ahead and captures in the center here. And so right now we're in the Queen's Gambit declined orthodox defense. What will be played here? Most likely the pawn will just recapture. If the knight captured, well, then there's a possibility after exchange of these bishops, the knight could be attacked with e4. But Capablanca has opened up this diagonal for his bishop, preventing this bishop from moving here at the moment and trying to trade off the bishops. So the game continues with pawn capture. And now what does Capablanca do? Well, take a look and see if you can figure out what move he plays next. Well, if you didn't guess this move, it's no big deal, because I myself would have thought the bishop would be developed, but we have this queen developing move, which lines up, I guess, on the knight. The knight is protected at the moment. Maybe there's a threat of bringing this knight up here and adding pressure to that knight. Let's see how things play out. Lasker gains space on the queen side, pushing this pawn, attacking a valuable central pawn with the less valuable flank pawn. And so what should Capablanca do here? Take a look, see if you can figure it out. And now we have maybe another unexpected move. Perhaps you weren't expecting this. Queen up to c6. And what does this do? Well, it immediately adds pressure to this d5 pawn, along with the knight. So they're piling up on that. It prevents the bishop from fianchettoing here, or it'll be captured. So interesting move there by Capablanca. So what is Lasker's next move? Well, his rook was under attack, so hopefully you found that option of maybe your only choice, bringing that rook to safety there. And the game continues with knight capturing, and now an attack on the queen here. If the queen moves, the knight could be picked off. So, what should Capablanca do in this position? Well, here, if we go back and take a look at this, we have a capture with check. So Capablanca knocks out his opponent's bishop pair, and it's a check as well, so there's no time to take that queen. So we have capture, and now the queen is still under attack, so queen retreats. And what does Lasker do here? All right. If we look at the material, Capablanca is up by a pawn, and generally when you're behind in material, you want to trade off pawns, but avoid piece trades. And then, of course, Capablanca being ahead wants to go ahead and preserve his pawns and trade off as many pieces. So Lasker just brings his rook to the open C file, and the game continues with queen lining up on the unprotected queen. So this is a great strategy to remember. You'll see probably all the best players make maneuvers like this where they line up a piece either on an unprotected piece, like the queen lined up on the queen here. Even though there's a pawn in between, you never know when things are being exchanged off and all of a sudden there's a discovered attack on the queen or some other piece. And then another strategy is to have a less valuable piece like this bishop lined up on the more valuable queen. And once again, even though the knight's in between that line, you never know when things get exchanged off and you have a discovered attack or a nasty pin. All right, the queen steps out of the line of fire, and now the game continues with what? What should Capablanca do next here? Now, what made Capablanca so good? Well, many reasons. He was great at tactics, but even better, or maybe not better, but known as more of a strategic player. He was an outstanding endgame player, and when it came to the endgame, he used something called schematic thinking, where he would look at the position on the board and try and figure out where the best squares would be for his pieces. And he might not even be able to immediately get them there, but then he would think, all right, this position or this square would be best for this particular piece. How do I get it there? So he would try and look ahead to see where he wanted his pieces to end up, and that would help dictate his strategy. So Capablanca goes to commences trading off pieces, because as I mentioned, if you're ahead and he's ahead by a pawn, you want to go ahead and trade off pieces. Now, the computer didn't like this move, saying that this was a mistake. And it looks like it was the first mistake of the game played here by Lasker. And, it's probably better to bring that knight forward. Although, I can see why that wasn't played, because the knight is helping protect the pawn here. So if Capablanca exchanges, we have 3 attackers, and if the knight would have moved, well, then there would only be 2 defenders, the rook and the pawn. So that's probably why this queen move was made. All right, so now what can Capablanca do in response to this? Well, I'm still thinking he needs to activate this bishop at some point. So maybe he'll bring the bishop up here to b5 and attack that knight. Let's see. No, instead he tries to make an even trade, bishop for bishop. And this is a more forceful move because the bishop can't move or the rook will be picked off. So, what's the option? Capture or defend the bishop that's under attack. So what does Lasker do? He goes with another option, and apparently it's the best move. He captures this knight. So now, if there's a recapture, the queen will be able to capture and then put pressure on that rook, and the king will be stuck in the center. So the game continues with capture of the rook, and now Capablanca is ahead. Some more material, recapture, capture of the bishop. And so now after the queen captures, we have an attack on the rook here. And I apologize if I made those moves too quickly. I'll try and slow it down a little bit so you have time to guess what the moves will be. So now, what should Capablanca do here? Well, obviously he has to figure out something to do with his rook that's under attack. So he just places the rook on the open file here. Once again, as I mentioned, taking a less valuable piece and lining it up on the more valuable king there. So Lasker centralizing his rook and also lining it up on Capablanca's king. So now this could be a threat here, capturing, because this pawn will be pinned to the king by the rook. All right, so what is played next? What will Capablanca do here? Centralization of the queen. And now if the pawn captures pawn, the queen can capture in the exchange here, and the queen will end up lined up, threatening a mate in one with rook and queen here. So what does Lasker do? He presses forward here, the best move according to the computer, and blocks the scope of the rook here, and gets rid of that possible mate in one threat. All right, how does Capablanca respond? He brings his king over, getting out of this line here, getting out of the line of fire of the rook. The computer says that is an inaccurate move. So stick around. After we go through these moves, I'll do the quick game review and see what accuracy rating both players played at, and it'll highlight the mistakes and the good and bad moves. All right. So what is next here? We have the rook centralizing. According to the computer, this is a mistake. And let's see if we can figure out why. Well, one issue may be that this knight is unprotected. So if the pawn captures here, there'll be a discovered attack on that knight. So that could be a potential issue. All right, what does Capablanca do? He drops back and attacks the queen. So why is this move played? Well, maybe to exchange down material, but there's a missed opportunity here. And I won't look at that now. As I said, when I do the game review, we'll highlight these kind of moves. I'll just go through it real quick. All right. Check on the king here, the best move by Lasker. How does Capablanca respond? He blocks with the rook. Knight gets out of the line of fire of that queen, brings the knight closer to the king's side where maybe it can drop in here and try and help with some type of attack. The king steps over to help guard, defend this pawn. in case the rook decides to, well, I don't know, maybe the knight could jump in there and add pressure. So if that knight jumps forward, could add pressure to that. All right, finally, these pawns that were confronting one another, Lasker decides to relieve the tension first, capturing. What does Capablanca do? He does not recapture. Instead, he pins that pawn to the rook, but, how serious of a pin is it? The pawn can still capture and the knight will be protecting, but that will further trade material. So we have a capture. Capablanca goes ahead and trades down material. So now material is even. Capablanca's turn. What should he do next here? We have a check. The only move possible here, bringing the king up. And now, what do you think Capablanca plays? Check again. Blocked by the knight. And now, what should Capablanca play? I hope you're having success guessing some of these moves. Don't feel bad if you don't get them all right. This is a game between two of the greatest players in history, so it might be difficult to guess a lot of their moves, especially if you're a beginner player. All right, we have the pawn capturing towards the center. And this does keep the queen on the board. The queen could have captured, but by keeping the queen in the center, we keep that pin on the knight. And then there could be a threat of bringing the rook over here and adding more pressure to that pinned piece. So the queen drops back to help defend. And as I mentioned, the rook adds more pressure to the pinned knight. So, two attackers, two defenders, but now the king and queen are just stuck on guard duty here. All right, what is played next? We have the pawn pressing forward and an attack here. Capture. And, what do you think Capablanca will do now? He recaptures. And now the queen, you can guess what Lasker is going to play, but remember, we have two attackers here. So the queen can't go after that pawn or the knight will be captured. So the knight jumps forward, protected by the queen, forking pawn and rook. And what should Capablanca play here? Well, hopefully you found this move. Launching the queen forward, forking. Now at the moment that knight is protected by the queen, but the king is under attack. So we have a king retreat. Capablanca is ahead by one pawn. And remember, if he's ahead by a pawn, he wants to trade off the remaining pieces. At least equal trades. Now, he might not want to trade off his rook for a knight, as the rook is more valuable. But in a rook and knight, rook versus knight endgame, that rook will have an advantage, especially once the queens are gone. So Capablanca jumps forward here. And now what? What do you think Lasker will do? He presses the pawn forward, and he does not attack this pawn. There's a possibility of moving the rook here and forking the knight and the queen. All right, so we have a check. Lasker runs. Now what? Check again. What does Capablanca do next? Another check. Will we have a draw by repetition of position here? No. Capablanca decides to play on. He pushes his pawn to b3. Apparently this was a mistake. So we'll have to see, why that was a mistake. This move is played, and computer really likes this. It does allow some possible attacks on the king, and that might be Lasker's only chance if he can run after Capablanca's king and chase it around. All right, the game continues with Capablanca moving to f4. Once again, trying to trade off material. And there's a threat here, a threat of rook capturing the pawn with check. And then Lasker's king would be wide open. But it's Lasker to move, and what do you think he will do here? He goes for the check. Capablanca blocks, so once again trying to trade off material. That is avoided. You want to avoid trading pieces when you're behind in material. So the pawn is captured, and apparently that is a mistake. So pawn capture, queen is under attack. Now we have an attack on the knight. Knight is defended. What will Capablanca play now? All right. We have check on the king. Where should Lasker go with that king? He moves up to e7. Check again. And now king up to f8. And so this is the first blunder of the game. So can you figure out why this is a blunder? Take a look at it. See if you can figure out what Capablanca should do next. We have a check. And this is where Lasker resigned. Now, especially for the beginners out there, if you're not sure why Lasker resigned, well, Lasker has only two options on where to move his king. Either king to e7 or king to g7. Of course, he doesn't want to block with the queen, or the queen will just be captured. Remember, when you're in check, you have three options or less. Capture the attacker, and that's not possible. Block, and as I said, you don't want to block with the queen, or it'll just be captured here on d8. So your final option is to run. So if the king runs to e7 here, well, what would that allow? Queen to e5 check, forking the king and the queen. So that would basically force a queen trade. So queen captures. Rook captures queen, and that would fork the king and the knight. So I'll show you that. If the king goes there. Actually, I won't play those moves out because I don't know if it'll mess up the game review where it shows the accuracy percentage. So I'll just tell you that again. If the queen moves here, we have queen to e5 check by Capablanca, and that forks the king and the queen, forcing Lasker's queen to capture Capablanca's queen on e5. Rook captures, forking the king and the knight. So the knight would go down, fall next, and Capablanca would be winning. So the other option is this: king to g7. But then that would be even worse, because then you would have queen to h8. The king would be forced to move. If the king moved up here, well, you have two options. You could just pick off the queen, but even worse, you could just play queen here to h6 mate. All right. Well, let me pull up the review and we can see what happened in this game. It looks like it was pretty even. Capablanca got an edge. I should say it was even in the first quarter of the game, but then Capablanca got an edge. He lost it a little bit, but then regained it, and then actually lost his edge again until that blunder at the end allowed him to win. So Capablanca had 14 great moves. I hope you found some of those when you were guessing what moves he would make. And Lasker had 4 great moves. Now, according to this, Capablanca played with 93.2% accuracy versus 88.8% by Lasker. And then the bad moves: 1 inaccuracy by each player, 2 mistakes by Capablanca, but 3 by Lasker. 1 missed opportunity by Capablanca, but that 1 big blunder by Lasker. And the computer states that Capablanca played at a 2500 rating level and Lasker played at 2400. And as far as the opening accuracy, 98.2% opening accuracy for Capablanca, 100% accuracy for Lasker. Capablanca played a 90.9% accurate middle game versus 83.8% by his opponent. But end game, 92.5% accuracy for Capablanca and only 86.8% for Lasker. Still good, but when you're playing Capablanca, who was kind of an unstoppable machine, especially in the end games, it's not enough to win against Capablanca. All right. Well, feel free to leave any comments, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.